Okay, so for week 16 Tuesday, you will have progress check number 5, last progress check of the semester, and the 279 to 292 quiz. But I'm going to go back and talk about pages 264 to 279 and also mention this article here, the auction article. So I'm going to address this first just because it's a little shorter. If you haven't had a chance to read it, then feel free to pause me and read now. But it was an article by the Wall Street Journal from 2012 about the ethics of holding an auction to auction off material related to the Clutter murder. So, you may recall the name Harold Nye from the KBI investigation team. Mr. Nye was the one who said to Dick, Perry's sister has never lived in Fort Scott, and the post office is closed on Saturdays. One of my favorite lines was good old Harold Nye. So Harold Nye has, of course, passed on, but his son was trying to monetize some information from the murder case. So, and here we have some lovely pictures of Dick and Perry. So you can see them if you haven't looked them up yet. The documents became pretty controversial. Now, there was a signed copy of In Cold Blood, and that definitely, is very valid to be auctioned off. But there were some other contested items. So the In Cold Blood copy is uncontested, or was uncontested, and that had some nice autographs in it and everything. There are some also uncontested letters that Truman Capote wrote to Harold Nye, one of which Mr. Capote complains about the appeal process for the prisoners. It seems like he wants them to die quicker so he can finish his book. Yikes. But anyways, Beverly and Eviana, interestingly enough, were still alive, at the time of this protest, and they were very upset about the possibility of the crime scene photographs being published in particular. I mean, understandably so, even though it's been many years. I mean, who would want to see, bloody crime scene photographs of their family and have someone pay to own those? It's a little bit creepy and grim when you think about it, right? So anyways, they have spoken out strongly against Truman Capote. They say that his book is a sensational novel which profited him and grossly misrepresented our family. So it would be really interesting to hear what their specific issues were with his representation, but that is never revealed in this article. So anyways, the photographs are pretty graphic, reveals the 4 victims wearing pajamas, bound hand and foot, and shot in the head. Mrs. Clutter and Nancy, of course, were in their beds, Kenyon on a couch in the basement, and Mr. Clutter on the mattress box on the basement floor. So anyways, that's kind of the issue at stake here, the controversy that In Cold Blood was stirring up, years after its publication, years after Truman Capote's death. So anyways, just figured I'd talk about that, share that with you, and see what you think. Is it legitimate to auction off these items, or should there be some sort of legal recourse for Beverly and Eviana and, anyone who doesn't want the brutal murder of their family to be, spread out and about? All right. So, pages 264 to 279. So when the section starts, we immediately find out that Dick's plans to escape have been foiled. His shiv was discovered. I thought this opening bit was a little interesting. Perry obviously doesn't have much to do. He's befriending a squirrel, but other than that, he's just kind of hanging around. So him watching these cats and seeing them scavenging for dead birds. And he said, most of my life, I've done what they're doing, the equivalent. So he relates very strongly to these scavenging cats, kind of representative of how he sees his life. So anyways, after that, we, first we get a little update on Don Cullivan. He now corresponds with Don regularly, and Perry, doesn't seem to have any sort of hope for forgiveness, no serious hope anyways. He did have this little kind of abortive escape plan. These men standing in the square who he somehow thought were going to help him. So he writes this note for them, and is ready to drop it out the window the next time they show up, but they never do again. So probably they were just curious. I find this last sentence really interesting too. What about Hickok? All preparations must include him. So in Dick's plan, he was like, well, absolutely, I'm not taking Perry. That would be ridiculous. It'd be stupid. I'm not taking Perry. But Perry still seems to have some sort of loyalty to Dick, which is strange, I think, personally. So anyways, carrying on, he's also considered suicide, which, is probably fair considering what he's facing, the possibility of taking control of his own death rather than having his life taken from him. His dream about cutting his wrists and ankles with a broken light bulb, his big big bird coming for him. So that is something that comes back. The commentary that Perry has here is, kind of interesting. I was free, I was flying, I was better than any of them. So we get the sense that Perry is someone who possesses a very deep kind of inferiority complex, and he just wants to feel good enough. He wants to feel superior in some way, and he's lived his life feeling like he's not good enough. Okay, so trial update. One really crucial bit of information in this section is related to the insanity defense, and it has to do with this rule, the Monotone rule. It was an ancient British law, and it was kind of the gold standard for a long time in determining whether someone could be considered insane or not, or temporarily insane or not. So the Monotone rule says that if the person who is accused knew what he was doing, he knew the nature of his act, he didn't think that he was gardening while he was killing someone. So he knew he was killing someone, and if he knew it was wrong, so if he had any conception that, this is something that should not be done, this is something that's illegal, this is something that is unethical, if he knew those two things, then he's mentally competent and responsible for his actions. So because of the very broad nature of this law, basically, unless you're hallucinating or delusional, then you are responsible for your actions. So there's not a real serious amount of hope for Dick and Perry to be able to be declared temporarily insane. So there's some debate about, who should assess this. Should it just be a basic physician, or should it be a more qualified person from a psychiatric institution? So nowadays it's pretty standard to include someone who is actually a mental health expert. But again, because of the kind of broad nature of this law, they were arguing, well, I think that a basic physician is going to be fine. So anyways, ultimately, Judge Tate denies the motion to give them a thorough psychiatric consultation, although Dick and Perry's lawyers do end up finding a qualified person anyways, and including that person in the testimony. So we'll see that later. The other motion that is advanced in this section is postponement of the trial. So in a purely coincidental twist of circumstances, the Clutter estate, so that includes the house, that includes all possessions, livestock, everything, is set to be auctioned the day before the trial. So, given how well known the Clutter family is, given the popularity and infamy of their case, the lawyers argue, probably with a fair amount of justification, that having this auction the day before the trial, that has to be prejudicial. I mean, it brings up all the information again. It could potentially prejudice jury members, who hadn't even been picked at that point. So they try to get the trial postponed, but Judge Tage denies the motion without comment. So not going so well for Dick and Perry here in terms of motions. So the next section is the what's the word I'm looking for? The description of the auction. And it is well populated. So it makes the commentary that when the Ashita family moved, they attracted, almost 100 people. And that was considered to be fairly successful. 5,000 people attended the Clutter auction. Now, please remember that in the entire town of Holcomb, there are 270 residents. So obviously, 5,000 people, they came from widely around the area. So mentioned there were cars from Oklahoma, Colorado, Texas, Nebraska. This was not a trivial auction by any means. So lots of people who are there to actually buy things, lots of people just there for curiosity. They mentioned the weather also helped a bit because can't do too much else in those kinds of conditions. The gentlemen who were well associated with Herbert Clutter assisted, and after this day, they are no longer officially employed. Compared it to a second funeral, though, so the atmosphere is not terribly cheery. Poor old Babe is taken off. Sue Kidwell, one last sad goodbye to lovely little Babe. But anyways, so that's the auction. kind of a sad event the day before the trial. Okay. This next section, double checking to make sure I'm not second guessing myself. Yeah. So this next section is actually the last section for this section of pages. So it goes on for a bit. One interesting commentary here at the beginning is that many people are thinking that the eyes of the nation are upon Garden City, but crimes like this seem to have become maybe more common. That in Colorado, just the next state over, they just don't even remember. There have been other multiple murders in various parts of the country. So just some commentary on the proliferation and the spread of crime during this time. So, anyways, everyone is ready for the day. The only person who looks a little out of place is Perry, who doesn't have appropriate suit-like clothing, and there is no one to give it to him. Mr. Meyer, the undersheriff, actually grants him clothing that is, non-jail clothing. But of course, Dick's parents made sure that he was dressed appropriately. Okay, so March 22nd, first day of trial. The residents that were called upon for this trial are all male, which is interesting. But they selected the members of the jury. Several were excused. They were dismissed because of their opposition to capital punishment. You obviously can't serve as a jury member in a capital punishment case if you are uncategorically opposed to capital punishment, absolutely. So anyways, we've got some jury members selected. We have alternates selected. A lot of them are associated with local churches. which was one of the arguments against moving the trial, against a change of venue request, was that the community, being so religious, perhaps might be more forgiving. So anyways, the voir dire proceeds, but the real interesting bit is going on in the background. So while they're selecting the jury members, Perry and Dick are writing these letters, essays, whatever you want to call them, for Dr. Jones, who is the psychiatrist who volunteered to examine them. So even though their insanity plea was officially conducted by just a regular medical physician, their lawyers felt that it was important to have an actual psychiatric employee assess these men. So to save some time, Perry and Dick are writing their kind of stories of their lives so that they can hopefully get some leniency in their case. So Perry goes first, talks about his very complicated background, his issues with his family, his issues with his mother, all of those types of problems. His mother always being drunk, not a whole lot of rules or discipline in his life, no one to show him right from wrong. He had some issues with stealing, his issues with wetting the bed, which of course incurred a lot of serious abuse from the nuns and the Salvation Army people who he stayed with at some point. Beaten with a large black leather belt, tossed into the tub with cold water. And then this bit is new. This is definitely like 100%, sexual assault. So having this type of sexual assault take place in Perry's childhood is definitely another element of his trauma. So more details about Perry, his issues while he was in the military, getting into fights. The story that he told his sister about throwing someone off a bridge comes back. It actually was a Japanese policeman, oopsie daisy, demolished a Japanese cafe and was court-martialed for that, stealing a Japanese taxi cab, violent outbursts of anger. So yeah, definitely some issues in Perry's past, and much of that, of course, we already knew about. So Dick's statement, I also think, is very interesting. His life, in contrast to Perry's, is like pretty blissful. We already know that he has, two parents who love him, who don't seem to have had any serious marital issues. He describes his life as normal for most of the time. He did pretty well in high school. He had, cute little girlfriend. Then it seems like his senior year was maybe where things started to fall apart a little bit. So he had the opportunity to go to college, but he didn't end up going. Shortly after that was when he had the automobile wreck, which was what his father blamed for his issues from that point on. Got a girl pregnant, was working a night shift job. That, was kind of the beginning of his turn. But again, it's like, okay, so those are some unfortunate life circumstances, but many people have been through those things and not become criminals as a result. We definitely don't see the type of trauma, apart from a potentially traumatic brain injury from the car accident that Perry has been through. It's a very, very different kind of upbringing. The really interesting thing, I think, is that he's open and honest about his pedophiliac tendencies. He says that he knows it's wrong, but in the moment, he doesn't give any thought to whether it's right or wrong. He seems to have some issues with impulse control. It's what he blames his stealing on as well. He talks about Nancy and says that the main reason that he went to the Clutter House wasn't even to rob them, but to rape the girl. So that moment when Perry said, "Let's turn around," that moment was going through Dick's mind. He was thinking, well, then I won't get the chance to rape this girl. Anyways, so that I thought was interesting that he was open about that. It doesn't seem like he's really confided in anyone about this before, which, is pretty fair. Definitely a pretty awful thing to admit. So anyways, that's Dick's confession, and that sort of ends the section with the jury selection being accomplished. So the next section will get the proper start of the trial. Things will actually start happening, and we'll get testimony from people. So even though we know probably how it's going to go, still interesting to see the process and see if there's any hope for Dick and Perry, or if it's just a foregone conclusion.